Gun battles raged in various parts of Kabul as rebel forces stormed into the Afghan capital and took firm control of the city. The presidential palace is in rival Mujahideen hands.
We appeal to all forces involved in the conflict, namely the armed forces, our Mujahideen brothers, so that they shall refrain from any kind of confrontation and not lose their patience.
With the hardline rebel leader Gulbuddin Hekmatyar rejecting the agreement to transfer power to opposition hands, the threat of an attack on Kabul by his forces still hangs over the capital. The militants still insist the present government should formally surrender by Sunday or face consequences. But some observers still think Hekmatyar will change his mind.
I will guarantee you that he will accept. Finally, he will accept.
Among the guerrillas who've entered Kabul, Ahmad Shah Massoud's group is the most dominant, and there's speculation that he's as much interested in stalling his rival Hekmatyar's progress as in taking charge himself. It's doubtful if opponents of the accord have the ability to capture Kabul on their own, but they do have the potential to disrupt the peace process, and not until they've been placated can there be lasting peace in Afghanistan. Ashish Rai, CNN, Kabul.
Next on CNN Headline.
There are reports of heavy casualties among the combatants supporting either the guerrilla commander Ahmed Shah Massoud or the leader of the Hezbi Islami movement, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. The Massoud forces appear to be more numerous and hold more areas. Despite the fighting, plans are still going ahead to install a transitional council in Kabul on Monday.
Fighters loyal to Ahmed Shah Massoud driving off an attack from their fiercest rivals, the Hezbi Islami. They've been enemies for 12 years. Now they're fighting for the greatest prize, control of the capital city. Massoud's men and their allies are getting the better of it so far. They secured the presidential palace this morning after a fierce battle with Hezbi Islami. It epitomizes everything they despised about the old order. Hatred of the regime was the only thing that tied the competing groups of Mujahideen together. Now both Massoud and Hezbi Islami's leader, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, believe that power is within their grasp, but it can only be seized at the other's expense. Less than 24 hours after the Mujahideen took Kabul, the worst nightmares of its people have come true. The city's split along political and ethnic lines, and this fighting can only get worse. Civilians are caught in the crossfire. A slum to the east of Kabul was attacked by Hezbi Islami. Either they were targeting the residents because they support Massoud, or their fire was inaccurate. In their panic, they tried to get to somewhere that was safe. In the end, all they found was a place to put the dead. There are plenty of weapons in Kabul. The government's armories have been broken open. Afghanistan doesn't have a chance while the killing continues. There should be a time for negotiation, for a political settlement. The only thoughts now, though, are about winning the battle for the capital city.
The United Nations Secretary-General, Dr. Boutros Ghali, has called for an immediate ceasefire in Afghanistan, urging rival Mujahideen groups to avoid further bloodshed. He was speaking before leaving Pakistan, where intense discussions among guerrilla groups are continuing. In Peshawar, Professor Mojaddedi, the head of Afghanistan's Transitional Council, has warned guerrillas in Kabul not to oppose him.
Those who want to oppose this government, they have to come down and accept the leadership. Otherwise, maybe the people will be punished.
Professor Mojaddedi said he and the Commission would go to Kabul as soon as possible. Darkness has delayed their departure. The hardline leader, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who's threatened to join the council, refused to join the council, has threatened to shoot down any plane flying to Kabul. Pakistan has said it hopes the Commission of Afghan guerrilla forces, led by Ahmed Shah Massoud, will prevail in Kabul. The statement is being interpreted as a withdrawal of support for their long-time ally, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who's fighting against Massoud's forces for control of the city.
This Mr. Hekmatyar's obvious ambition and his insistence on a fight to the finish that is most galling to his allies and colleagues, and is deeply distressing to the Afghans here who are shocked by this violence in Kabul. Some Pakistani religious leaders and some Mujahideen are still trying to bring Mr. Hekmatyar on board. But Some moderate leaders who've always been at daggers drawn with Mr. Hekmatyar are now vehemently critical, making any possibility of cooperation seem remote if and when this violence stops.
Sibgatullah Mojaddedi has set off from the Mujahideen base in Peshawar this morning in a convoy of 100 vehicles. Their 150-mile journey across the Khyber Pass to the Afghan capital is expected to take at least 12 hours. But there are doubts whether they'll get through. Key routes into Kabul are controlled by the hardline Hezb-e-Islami guerrillas who are opposed to the council. And they've warned they'll stop the convoy reaching the city.
There's been vicious fighting in the center of Kabul for a second day. Every trace of the euphoria which followed the fall of the city to the Mujahideen has disappeared. It was supposed to be a holy war to expel an infidel government. The infidels were forgotten almost as soon as they capitulated. Machine guns are mounted on the mosques, and two groups of Muslim fundamentalists are fighting each other for the right to make Afghanistan an Islamic Republic. The coalition led by Ahmed Shah Massoud, which supports the interim government, has the initiative. Massoud's men took this position, which overlooks the whole of Kabul late last night after heavy fighting. They've also taken a number of guns, which they're using against the Hezb-e-Islami positions over there. They are anti-aircraft guns, which have been lowered so they can be fired at the men who used to control them. The guns have been pounding Hezb-e-Islami all day. The Afghan Air Force is supporting the interim government. Airstrikes were one of the most effective tactics the old regime had against the Mujahideen. Today the Air Force bombed Hezb-e-Islami with some accuracy. Innocent people are caught in the middle of all this. Their homes and their lives are being destroyed. In Kabul there's a choice. You can run away or fend for yourself. Casualties are coming in under fire to the Red Cross Hospital. Too much of the shelling here has been directed at residential areas. It kills ordinary people. This Hezbi commander said they'd fight until the Pashtuns regained power. He said there was no place for the ethnic minorities who are on the other side. His men are besieging the fortress which held the key to Kabul for more than 1,000 years. But helicopters, reinforcements, and a place to land them matter these days. Massoud's men have it all. Kabul airport is in their hands. Fresh fighters are being flown in from his strongholds in the north. Hezb-e-Islami controls southern Afghanistan, but it can't do anything like this. They cursed Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, the leader of Hezb-e-Islami. They said his men forced them out of their homes.
I've heard explosions from what I can only presume are heavy artillery or tanks. As well as that, there's a certain amount of firing into the air going on from the Mujahideen. Tracer shells have been going up into the air again, and they've been letting off flares. But the people in the center of the town are fighting at the moment, of that I'm certain.
What scope is there for the political leadership establishing itself in Kabul?
I think it's really going to be extremely difficult for them. There was a false alarm this evening saying that they were up. There was some talk that the plane was turned back. It's going to be very, very hard for them when they do arrive here, I think, because of the way that the fighting's gone in the last couple of days. The people, particularly on the Hezb-e-Islami side, are very important in this. They're looking on this, I think, as a fight for the rights of their ethnic group, the Pashtuns. And while they think that their group is being done down by the other side, they're going to be very reluctant to stop fighting. This, after all, is the opportunity for power which they've been working for 12 years.
The best chance of peace is the war weariness of ordinary people. Hezb-e-Islami is still shelling the southern suburbs of Kabul. It's indiscriminate fire, and it's terrorizing the people who get caught in it. These children are crying for their mother. In the confusion, they were separated. The boy thinks she's caught on the street where the shells are falling. The fighting hasn't stopped, even though every group that's doing it will be represented in the transitional government. Guerrillas from Hezb-e-Islami want to dominate the new republic. even though most of them have been forced out of Kabul. They're within range and they still have some fight left in them.
Islami are simply contenting themselves with lobbing a few shells at the city at the moment, not because of any ceasefire, but because they've been given a beating. We just visited their front lines about half a mile from here, and they're in an ugly, aggressive mood. One of them wanted to shoot us, but he was restrained by his colleagues.
Civilians are moving away from the places where fighting is still going on. Hezbi Islami pulled out of this area last night. They left behind a picture of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, their leader. The people here are caught between the two front lines, so they're becoming refugees, like 5 million other Afghans.
Hekmatyar's groups now appear ready to contemplate ceasefire. Masoud's gamble seems to have been rewarded.
محترم پروفسور حضرت سبغتالله مجددی رئیس شورای موقت اسلامی و ممثل دولت اسلامی افغانستان امروز طی مصاحبه‌ای در برابر سؤال راپورتر تلویزیون که پس از 1 دهه مهاجرت نخستین احساساتشان را از ورود به کابل بیان دارند چنین گفتند.
امیدوار هستیم که ندای ما را ملت مسلمان افغانستان قبول کنند و بدانند که ما از چند دسته عفوی را ما اعلام کردیم. کسانی که مرتکب بعضی سهو و خطا و جرایم شده بودن اگر امروز ندامت میکشند و رجوع میکنند و تسلیم میشوند، کسانی که مخالفت میکنند تسلیم میشوند به همین دولت اسلامی و حکومت اسلامیشان، البته اونا در عفو شامل خواهد بودند و ما امیدوار هستیم که این بعضی اختلافات و بعضی آشوبه‌ای هایی که در کابل رخ داد از طرف بعضی برادران ما ازشان توقع نداشتیم. ما فکر میکردیم که برادرها در وقتی که وطن ما به پیروزی کامل خود میرسه و یک حکومت اسلامی واقعی در اینجا قائم میشود در کابل ما و در افغانستان ما، این برادرها با ما و دیگر برادران خود همکاری میکنند و به همکاری ما مساعدات بیشتر و خدمات بیشتر انجام خواهیم داد. ولی متاسفانه که به صحبه بگوییم، به خطا بگوییم، به هر راهی که ما تعبیر کنیم کار بسیار نامناسب بود و بسیار مردم ما رنج بودن. در عرض راه می آمدم و صدها فامیل دیدم که اکثر از اینها زنها و بیش زبان بودن و اطفال خود بودن که اینها هجرت میکردن، آل از کابل باز هجرت میکردن و جلال آباد و پاکستان. و ما تعصب میکردیم که در ما مهاجرین خود را باید از خارج کشور خود پس به کشور خود به امن امان دعوت کنیم و به افتخار و سربلندی بیاین. در این وقت که اینا میروند باعث تاثیر بشد. خب ما بس امیدوار هستیم که برادرها به سبب خطا خود فهمیده و از عفوی استفاده کرده سلاح خود را به زمین بگذارن و بزرگترین فرصت در حلقه برادران خدمتگار و مجاهد خود داخل شوند و از جاهایی که آمدن جاهای اشغال کردن پس به جای اصلی خود برگردن تا بیشتر سبب خونریزی و آشوبگری در کشور پاک ما نشد. دولت اسلامی افغانستان